Hello everyone and welcome back to the Timeline Astrology podcast. This is Gary O'Toole and this is all about planetary dignities and debilities. This is a bit of a controversial topic and I understand why, but I want to explain to you in this podcast why I think there's a big misunderstanding here. So essentially, nobody likes to hear anything bad about themselves, of course. It's a psychological thing. We all want to hear good news. We all want a positive spin on our lives and our character and our personality and so on. But the thing is, when we don't address the elephant in the room, there is a problem, because when you have a reading, whether a one-on-one personal reading with somebody or somebody delineates a certain planetary configuration that you have in your birth chart, and they do that publicly, and they don't say anything bad about it because they don't want to come off as being negative or something. And essentially what they end up doing is not allowing you to feel seen or heard. Now, I know this well because I have some debilitated planets in my chart. I know what that means. I know I've had to work hard on myself my whole life to transform, you might say, those more negative aspects into more positive attributes. So it's not an easy task. Oftentimes, planets that are debilitated, for example, as my teacher Pearl Finn used to say, they need help getting up out of the chair. They need a lot of help sometimes getting up out of the chair. They're just not naturally strong. So if you come along and you read somebody's birth chart and you don't in any way speak about that and their life experience of that weakness, that's a problem. And it's a growing trend I'm seeing, unfortunately, and I'm seeing it more so in Western astrologers who primarily use the tropical zodiac. And I believe that there's a couple of reasons for this, but there's the main reason and then there's a secondary reason. The main reason is a very technical one. Simply, if you use the tropical zodiac, you are not using the actual debilitated and exalted positions as per the sidereal, not the actual constellation, the star sign. So when we talk about the tropical signs, it's a symbolic sort of representation of each of the signs, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and so on. So if you're referring to a planet debilitated in the tropical zodiac, it's not actually debilitated. And this is really the main point, it's a technical one, because when tropical astrologers refer to planets in the tropical sign debilitated and point out, like celebrity after celebrity or just a well-known person who just doesn't seem to have those kinds of debilitated traits, first of all, you're not even looking at the actual sidereal sign, the star sign. So an example of this is, somebody with debilitated Venus in tropical Virgo. And then the argument is, look at these celebrities, like one after the other. There's a long list who have Venus in tropical Virgo. And they don't seem to portray any of those debilitated traits. They seem to be quite artistic, that they pick out artists very specifically to make their point in that case. That's a certain bias, of course. But the point of the matter is here that actually Venus in tropical Virgo is in sidereal Leo. Probably one of the most creative signs there is. So if you've got tropical Venus Virgo, you've got sidereal Venus Leo. And that explains that. So that's the first point. That's a technical point. But the second point is quite obviously the new age that we live in at the moment. It's all sugar-coated and essentially just talk about all the good stuff. And so planetary debilitation is just not something that's favored. Even though in Western Hellenistic traditions, they don't just talk about debilitation, they talk about detriment and all kinds of things. Which again, I believe that in modern Western astrology, there's a sort of kickback against these kind of traditional approaches, whether Hellenistic or Vedic, because they see them as quite negative. I don't think they're negative or positive. I just think they are what they are. If you've got a debilitated planet, you've got a weak point in your chart. There's something you've had to deal with. And if you try and ignore that, that's not going to help. If you completely embrace that, you're more likely, like I said, like I have myself in my life, work on that part of yourself and increase that quality if you need to increase that quality, or appease that planet in some way, or do whatever work on yourself, And by the way, I'm going to speak of in this podcast ways you can improve the qualities of each of the debilitated planets. And it isn't what you think it is. It's not necessarily a direct approach. So another point to be made just before we get into each planet and what we can do about each debilitated planet and what actually each debilitated planet means. What does it actually mean to have a debilitated planet? Let's talk practically here. If you're going to look at the key thing about a debilitated planet, which is the body part that you were born with that is weaker, or an organ that is weaker, or a system in your body that is weaker than all the others, when you have a debilitated planet ruling that, there is no denying that at all. You can talk about different traits that you might say, okay, well, that's a nice, way to look at Venus and Virgo because it has so many wonderful traits besides talking about the negative traits of Venus and Virgo. And every planet in every sign in every house has both positive and negative traits, by the way. But if you're talking about a body part that Venus rules in your birth chart, and you have an inherent, like a genetic condition that predisposes you to certain illnesses even, because of that weakness, like that weak link in a chain, you cannot deny that. Now, it doesn't always granted show up maybe in a blood test if you go to your physician and they don't always necessarily point something out, but you know yourself. If you got a debilitated planet, and I mean truly debilitated, not tropically, but sidereally, you'll know that when you have an issue, it's in that body part that that planet represents. So that's an aside. I'm not going to get into that here because that's a whole other study. And I have watched enough people over the years, 30 years of studying, and seen how their debilitated planets have affected them physically, as in physical conditions, like problems in their physical body. To know we cannot sugarcoat this kind of thing, you need to talk about the problem and appease the planet or strengthen the planet if needs be, whatever it might be. Now, again, I'm not going to get into maybe all of this sort of upaya, as they call them in Vedic astrology, the different remedial measures. I'm just going to talk about each planet in each debilitated sign and what that might mean and how that could be helped out in a practical, very down-to-earth way. And by the way, before we again get into all of these, one point to be made here is that this is another argument to be made. When Western tropical astrologers, in a way, decry the whole debilitation of planets and sugarcoat it all, they don't realize actually that from a Vedic point of view, probably about 80-something% of the time is one figure I've heard bandied about, but I don't know what the exact figure is, but a lot of the time, and let's say most of the time, a debilitated planet is mitigated by other factors, other planets in the chart. So actually, it's true to say that even though you have a debilitated planet, it doesn't mean that it's the worst thing ever and that you can't overcome it and you can't improve that area of your life through different means. And this is what we're going to get into here actually, because it's actually other planets that will help out a debilitated planet. So the sun in Libra, it's debilitated, it's in its fall. If you think about the symbol of Libra, it's the half circle with two lines. It's essentially a symbol of the setting sun. So it's all about the self being negated in a way, being put aside for other people's needs. In the interaction, practically that is not a good thing for an individual who, and for anybody, because, the sun is about the sense of self and confidence and self-esteem. And if that's weak, that's not great. There's no sugarcoating this one. You have to address the issues. So if you have the sun in Libra, sidereally, not tropically, because again, if somebody's to say to you that the sun is in Libra in your tropical chart, then I don't see your debilitated sun. No, the sun is therefore in Virgo, sidereally, in the star sign Virgo. It's not in Libra. At any rate, if the sun is in Libra, actually in the star sign Libra, it is weak. And that would occur from mid-October to mid-November. So the sun in Libra is weak. It can be helped out by the planet that exalts in Libra, which is Saturn. Saturn is the planet of hard work, of time, and working hard over a long time. And if you don't have confidence in yourself, just naturally from the get-go, just sensing that you always were underconfident growing up with the sun in sidereal Libra, then one way that you'll understand this is that you will eventually, that's Saturn, very slowly, over many, many years, build your sense of confidence through trial and error. You fail over and over again, and you keep getting back up over and over again. That's one way to build confidence, to build the sun energy with the sun in Libra. The other thing you can do is, because Libra is ruled by Venus, is accentuate Venus qualities, and Venus is about relationships. So oftentimes when you see someone with the sun in Libra, they benefit from being in a relationship. They benefit from others who boost their sense of self and self-confidence. And I always think about the sun in Libra as somebody who finds themselves in the other, in the relationship. The third one is then Mars, which is the ruler of Aries, where the sun would be exalted, opposite. So Mars is very much about building our confidence through taking action, to be very proactive. When we take action, it builds our confidence. And you know this, when you do something and you then successfully do something, or even if you don't, but you try, just doing something alone is going to actually build your confidence. So there are the three planets, Saturn, Venus, Mars, all help the sun out of debilitation. But the sun in itself can actually be something you work on. But you do have to, I have to put a caveat in here with any of the planets in debilitation. And that is, if you have the sun debilitated, then you can't just build your sense of self up to the point where you're inflating yourself and trying to pretend like you're someone else. Like you have this sun exalted in Aries, because that's not who you are. And it won't be long, but maybe it will be some years, but it will eventually happen that life will take you down a peg or two, that someone will take you down, or events will take you down. And then you don't just come crashing down back to where you started from. You might actually crash further. So in other words, if you are underconfident in yourself and you've been building yourself up for years, but you have this fragile sense of self, and then all of a sudden something comes along and knocks you, and all your confidence is lost and you really crash. You don't want to do that. You don't want to build yourself up to the point where you're going to crash. You want to build yourself up to the point where you have this sense of quiet confidence. Like there's a middle way with all of these planets, whether a debilitated or exalted planet, which are in a sense really extreme. And really, extremes are not great in another way, even exalted planets. And by the way, if you have lots of exalted planets, that doesn't mean that your life is wonderful. There's a misconception here about exalted planets. I've met enough people over the years who have lots of exalted planets and who are very unhappy with their life because they have a high expectation out of life and they don't always meet those expectations. And certainly life doesn't meet those expectations, and other people don't meet those expectations for them. Instead, of course, debilitation is probably harder in a sense because you just started baseline, but you don't maybe have as high an expectation out of life that you could do with being picked up a bit, building yourself up a bit. But either way, whether you come from one extreme or the other, you want to ideally come into the middle path where it's a quieter place. Like in this case of the sun, it's not an egoic sense of self and boosting yourself and sun in Aries type of individual. Or it's not somebody who's putting themselves down either, a sun in Libra type of person, because those two extremes are very egoic. The sun in any extreme situation becomes more egoic. But in a middle way, it's kind of like a healthy sense of self, a healthy ego, a healthy sense of self and self-esteem and self-confidence. So that's sun in Libra. Moon in Scorpio. The moon is debilitated in Scorpio for obvious reasons, you might say. Scorpio is where we dwell on the worst case scenarios. The moon is about our hearts, how we feel. And it's all about safety and security. That is well placed in Taurus, where not only is the moon exalted, but it's said to co-rule according to some Vedic astrologers along with Venus. And it also is said to have its root strength, quote unquote, in Taurus. So Taurus is essentially, whatever way you spin it, a really good place for the moon because it steadies the mind in very basic things like sensual enjoyments, like just experiencing life through the senses itself brings you into the moment and calms the mind and the emotions. Of course, relationships and family and community and supports and all of the basics in life support somebody mentally. That's the moon in Taurus. All of that is challenged in Scorpio because Scorpio is opposite security. It's about insecurity and vulnerability and change and unexpected change and death and all of these things that we eventually have to face one day. All of these things that just kind of life throws a curveball at us and we don't know what's going to happen. But at the same time, with moon in Scorpio, the issue with it, of course, the debilitation of it is the mental and emotional toil it takes on a person by catastrophizing all of the time, like thinking the worst, like imagining the worst. Like, of course, yes, we're all going to die one day, but you don't want to sit around your whole life thinking about that. And yes, of course, change happens all the time and unexpected change all the time. And things that we used to rely on are lost or, it's no longer there for us. But we don't also want to dwell on that all the time. We don't know what's going to happen, of course, but we can just enjoy what we do have while also being open to change, of course. You don't want to bury your head in the sand about it either. So there are two planets only, actually. Two planets that can take the moon out of debilitation, because the moon in Scorpio is in Mars' sign. So Mars is an obvious mitigating factor for the moon in Scorpio. Mars is about taking action, being very proactive, and that can help the mind overcome a great deal. And moon in Scorpio is all about overcoming challenges anyway. So yes, you might be sitting around dwelling about the worst case scenarios, but you're actually doing that for a very important reason. You're trying to prepare yourself for the worst case scenario. But even though it will likely never happen, apart from the death thing, because we know that will happen, but everything along the way, all the things you worry about, like, they're usually not the things that happen. The things that you don't worry about, you haven't even thought about, that happen, like that throw you a curveball. But all of that energy, that mental and emotional energy, actually was then all the time wasted on thinking about things that would never actually happen. And then when something actually does happen, you don't have the wherewithal to actually deal with that thing that just happened. That's the debilitation of the moon in Scorpio. Mars is about your courage to overcome those thoughts as well, but also to overcome those things that befall all of us, the unexpected things in life. So that's Mars. The other planet is Venus, which rules the opposite sign, Taurus, along with the moon, again, according to a lot of Vedic astrologers. So Venus ruling Taurus is a great remedial measure for the moon. Any kind of Venus activity at all, but obviously more especially the basics like food, all of these nourishment things, shelter, community, relationships, and obviously a partner does wonders for one's mental health, and a family unit that's supportive, and a community, more expanded sense of self in a community. All of these nurture and provide safety for the moon in Scorpio. So Mars and Venus are two really good planets for the moon in Scorpio. Mars in Cancer, and Mars is currently transiting Cancer in the winter of 2024-25, and it is debilitated. And now, if you don't think it's debilitated, you're not looking at the sidereal zodiac. You think that Mars has gone into Leo, and it is actually still in Cancer and will retrograde in Cancer, and that's a whole other, and kind of that adds more complexity in a way, and almost in a way mitigates the debilitation and makes it feel like it's exalted in a way. But at the end of the day, Mars in Cancer is debilitated. Mars is about action, being proactive. As I mentioned, when the moon is in Scorpio, you want to be proactive to overcome those challenges of the mind. But when Mars is in Cancer, the mind, the emotions themselves overcome the action, the impulse to act, to be proactive. Instead, I might do it if I feel like it, but actually I don't really feel like it. And when you don't feel like doing something that you know is good for you, that you'll feel better afterwards, and the most obvious thing to do is to exercise, for example, to go down to the gym or go for a run, go for a walk, or to take on that challenge, or to do that thing, or to, meet that head on, all of those Mars type of things. We just don't do it necessarily all the time in Cancer because we don't have that energy. We don't have the will to do it, and we don't feel motivated. And when we don't have the willpower to do it, we also don't have the energy or willpower not to do the things that we actually shouldn't be doing. And then we end up in situations where we don't feel great. We feel worse than we started. So that's the potential problem with Mars in Cancer. There are 3 planets that help it out. So the first is Jupiter, which is exalted in Cancer, unlike Mars. Again, Mars is just kind of a bit sort of like lost in Cancer and sort of meandering about, not being very directed like it normally likes to be. But Jupiter is exalted in Cancer because it enjoys the sort of meandering and the connection with people and community, and more especially what Cancer represents, which is the feeling state and the intuition, the deeper sense of what is right. And you have to connect in with that in terms of how you're feeling, which is what Jupiter in Cancer exalted is all about. Mars is not about feeling into states. It's about taking action regardless how you're feeling. Jupiter is about, first of all, feeling what you're feeling and intuiting, even like on a deeper level. Cancer is a very intuitive, instinctual sign. So operating on that level, apart from all the other things that Jupiter represents in terms of connection with people and feeling comforted by other people and comforting other people also, that's Jupiter in Cancer as well. So Jupiter in Cancer can really do wonders for Mars by connecting with people. If you feel like you don't have the mojo, the energy to get going and doing something, Go to a group that supports you and makes you feel comforted and cared for. And then you actually might find that you got more energy from that group. Or tune into your own feelings, because Mars in Cancer doesn't mean to say that you have to get up and go and keep moving all the time and avoid your feelings. No, it could be that you actually need to sit with your feelings for a while and process them. The other planet is the moon, of course, more obviously, because the moon rules Cancer. So the moon is a mitigating factor for Mars. Now, they have a very complicated relationship, Moon-Mars, because they each debilitate each other. Mars in Cancer and then Moon in Scorpio. But when Mars is in Cancer, the moon can help out by just, again, feeling our feels. Just feel your feelings. Because that's going to ultimately, even if it doesn't do it initially, it's going to make you feel better. Because if you don't avoid how you're feeling and process your feelings fully, you're likely to be more energized by that, even if you don't feel that way initially. The other planet then is Saturn, which rules the opposite sign Capricorn, where Mars is exalted, which is all about discipline. And just like with the Sun debilitated in Libra, and Saturn helping it out over the long term by just getting up and getting up and getting up, no matter how many times you get pushed down, just keep getting up. Saturn in Capricorn is kind of the same for Mars, but it's more about being very systematic and rigid in a way and very disciplined. So regardless of how you feel, with Mars in Cancer, Saturn suggests just do it. Just do it. Yeah, feel your feels and all of that, but now spend some time doing this discipline thing. Go for a run. Even if you don't feel like it, put your runners on. See how you feel then. If you don't feel like going to an exercise class, get on the mat, lie down, see how you feel. Slowly, 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 as Saturn always is, slowly, keep doing it, bit by bit by bit. You just build it up bit by bit. And this is a better piece of advice for someone with Mars in Cancer than telling them they should go down to the gym 3 days a week and do an hour each time. That's not going to work for Mars in Cancer folk. Because they don't have the energy, they don't have the motivation. They need to know that they just need to do a little bit each time, a little bit, more and more and more is added up. And actually, there's this notion that when we do anything, we don't really feel motivated before we do something, usually, actually, especially if you have Mars in Cancer. No, normally we start something and about 10-15 minutes into a run, for example, then you start feeling it. Okay, now I'm getting into it. Like I was hating this for the first 15 minutes, but now I'm like getting into my stride in a way. And that's the same with anything. Whatever you feel that you're putting off with Mars in Cancer, even if it's not exercise, it could be a task you have to perform and you don't want to do it, or a person you have to deal with that you don't want to deal with. Like they're in some way perturbing you, or they've said something that you really need to talk about, or they've crossed the line, whatever it is. Saturn is about drawing the line. When you just get started and started doing something, then you're more motivated to do more. And then when you do more, then you get more motivated to do more, and then so on and so on and so on. So think about it that way. Don't think, I'm going to start off motivated, and if I don't start off motivated, I'm not going to do it at all, because that will never happen. And again, especially if you've got Mars in Cancer. So the next one is Mercury in Pisces. Mercury in Pisces is debilitated because the mind, the intellect, the analysis is lost at sea here. There's just too many things to think about, and it's overwhelming for the mind to deal with. Pisces is confusing for the mind. It is wonderful, spiritually speaking. It creates all of this kind of outside the box thinking. A prime example that people use all the time with this, of course, is Albert Einstein, Mercury in Pisces. He had just this way of thinking that was just different, and he wasn't, going like into it in a very sort of straightforward manner. Pisces just is so open. That's all well and good, but you can just listen to anybody talk about Einstein's life and discover the challenges he had around that as well. But Mercury in Pisces, if you are mentally challenged by that, if you're just overwhelmed and frazzled, then mitigating factors are two. There is the planet Jupiter, which rules Pisces, and then there's also the planet Venus, which is exalted in Pisces. There isn't a third because opposite we have Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury itself. But we could suggest that Mercury itself in Pisces is what can help it out itself. So in other words, if you've got this sense of overwhelm, think about Mercury in Virgo. I need to organize my thoughts. I need to maybe write my thoughts down in a journal. I need to categorize things, and I need to be very orderly about things and manage myself, because things in Pisces can so easily go out of whack because they're not managed very well always. There's all this sense of going with the flow, and all of that's wonderful, but mentally going with the flow can sometimes mean just going with whatever anyone is saying, whatever anything's happening. And it's like you let your mind become overwhelmed by everything. So obviously it's good to kind of draw some lines here, draw some borders and make some categories and say, okay, that's right, that is not right. I don't need to be thinking about that. Maybe I do need to think about that. Let me put that down here and then get rid of that. That's Virgo. The other two planets, as I said, are Jupiter and Venus. Jupiter, again, because it rules Pisces, where Mercury is debilitated, and Jupiter is about cohesion and coherence and order in another sense. It's even more orderly in a way than Mercury. Mercury in Virgo, it's very orderly in a very pragmatic way. But the order I refer to here about Jupiter is that it's cohesive and is almost like this sense of like everything's in order. Like to see the sort of patterning, the sort of the magic behind everything, that everything has a sort of system in a way, everything has a sort of unfoldment in a perfect way. And, to align with that when Mercury's in Pisces is to align with some higher power, we might say, quote unquote. I'm not so keen on the word higher in this time now because I'm following teachers who more reflect this kind of inner innate state, you might say, this core being that reflects those kinds of that feeling, that sense outwardly in terms of, traditions that, don't see, like tantric traditions more especially I'm referring to here. But essentially this sense of that everything is in order, everything is coherent, even if it seems chaotic on the surface of things, there's an underlying pattern. And to tap into those underlying patterns, it's helpful with astrology, for example, but also any kind of traditional thinking that brings a sense of wonder and awe and the magic of everything. And it's not so overwhelming. It's actually comforting for the mind. So that's a really great one with Mercury in Pisces. And then the second one then again is Venus, which is exalted in Pisces. And actually when you have both of them in Pisces, Mercury and Venus, Mercury actually benefits from that. It lifts up Mercury. But in a sense, Venus again then gets pulled down. The mood can drop because, in other words, when you have Venus in Pisces, there's this typically a sense of being able to just go with the flow and enjoy whatever's happening. And okay, you're going to do that. Fine. You go off and do that. I'll do this. That person's doing that. This is happening. That's happening. It's all wonderful. Love everybody. Everything's just great. That's Venus in Pisces. Mercury in Pisces is, I don't really know what's happening here. So what are you doing again? And like, when are we meeting? And what time is it again? With Venus in Pisces, it can mitigate that because we can just kind of enjoy what's happening, even though our minds really want to grasp some sort of order. It's really hard for the mind to kind of just flow like that, but Venus can help it flow. Oh, again, like when they come together, which is not actually unusual, Venus and Mercury are close together quite often. When they are in Pisces, and they will be, by the way, in 2025 for much of the beginning of the year, as they both retrograde in 2025 in March into April, that will actually help out Mercury more than Venus. So then it's like, okay, I'm understanding this. Thank you for communicating that with me. Okay, now we're clear about it. Now I can understand this and I can work with this. Okay, great. But in doing that, Venus in a way gets pulled down and the mood can drop because it's like, oh, it's just not this kind of going with the flow and whatever you want to do, that's fine. No, it's like, okay, thank you for explaining that to me. Okay, let's communicate more. I need to understand this. I need to understand that. Right? So it's all kind of given to Mercury in that sense when Venus is with Mercury in Pisces, and it's taken from Venus. It's taken from the flow, essentially. But at any rate, we're talking about Mercury in Pisces, and Venus helps out Mercury in Pisces, no doubt. Then Jupiter in Capricorn. And, Jupiter in Capricorn is an obvious one to talk about debilitation because Jupiter, in a way, along with the sun is the most obvious one in a way because the sun again is holding everything in place. And if somebody doesn't have a strong sense of self, it all could kind of fall down. You need to keep a strong sense of self. Even in the physical body, the sun represents the bones, like in the spine. And if you don't have like a spine, then you don't have anything keeping everything upright. So Jupiter, though, is the other one because the sun and Jupiter is so massive that really it's not just the sun spinning around all the planets around it. It's really more the sun and Jupiter and this Barry center that is called, like with the two of them kind of spinning around each other and creating this kind of central point in the middle of the two that actually all the planets are spinning around. So actually we need to have Jupiter strong as well in a sense. to have this sense of everything is coherent and cohesive and drawn together and held together in space. That's literally what Jupiter does in our birth charts. Everything seems to fit, everything is coherent and clear, and I understand, and everything kind of is working out, and there's a flow. When Jupiter is debilitated in Capricorn, Capricorn isn't about flow, it's about systematically breaking down things and working things out in a very systematic way. And there's a doubt that creeps in. There's a I don't know if there's a sense of clarity, or there's a sense of knowledge even, or a sense of trust or faith certainly in the process, because when you're working so hard at getting it, it's almost suggestive of this not knowing it in your bones. So when somebody has Jupiter in Capricorn, there's this sense of doubt and lack of faith, essentially. And they're looking everywhere for that faith and reassurance from other people. And as soon as you start looking for it from other people, I need you to tell me that what I'm doing is right, that I am who I'm meant to be. I am meant to be this person. I'm meant to be doing this thing. You'll see this all the time with Jupiter and Capricorn people who don't feel that sense of clarity and purpose and meaning, and they don't have faith in themselves, and they don't have faith in life either. And so it's all this kind of doubting and working hard itself with the doubt that is a potent mix of just not getting anywhere fast, essentially. So what can help Jupiter out in Capricorn? Well, the ruler of Capricorn, quite obviously Saturn. Again, Saturn's coming to the rescue. Can you see how many times Saturn is helping out here? Saturn rules Capricorn, and it is again over time. And this is why, like myself with so many debilitated planets, it's time that builds confidence for these people with debilitated planets, myself included. I wasn't confident as a young person, as a youngster, as a teenager, as a young person, as a young adult. It took a long time. I'm now 51. It's taken a long time to build my confidence. And Saturn is what did it for me. It's not that Saturn is even particularly strong in my chart. You don't even have to have these planets particularly strong otherwise. But when you have a debilitated planet, any of those other planets, as I'm referring to here, can help out. And again, Saturn is coming to the rescue for Jupiter, giving you this sort of faith in yourself by just keeping at it. Have a systematic approach. And yes, okay, you might doubt things and you might look for proof all the time and you might be very skeptical and, you might not have that kind of strong faith. But, okay, just keep working at it. Keep working towards this goal, this whatever it is, this Capricorn thing, which is all about goals and ambitions. And you will be proven right eventually. You just got to keep going. The other planet then is Mars, because Mars is exalted in Capricorn. And so again, Mars comes to the rescue for now Jupiter, because again, if you don't have faith and you lack this sort of even intuitive sense of what is right, and you're not very clear and knowledgeable, the one thing you need to do is take action. You don't want to be frozen, as sometimes Capricorn can suggest, where this is kind of hesitation at least, maybe even this frozen in fear kind of thing about, I don't want to do anything because I'm not sure. Is this the right thing for me to do? Can you tell me? I don't know. Is this what I'm meant to be doing? Mars is just about you do something. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, because you're going to learn from your actions. Obviously, you don't want to be crazy. You don't want to do crazy stuff. But if you take action, you will feel that you are gaining knowledge, at least. You will likely also feel that it's building your intuition, that you're getting good at this kind of thing about, okay, that didn't work out. Now let me try this. Okay, let me refine it. Keep refining it. Keep working towards making a system for myself to get clear, to be clear about what I'm meant to be doing. So that's Mars. The other planet then is the moon, because the moon rules the opposite sign Cancer, where Jupiter is exalted. So if Jupiter's in Capricorn, bring in the moon, bring in connection. If you don't feel faithful and connected, then connect more with people. Open your heart to people. Allow people to open their heart to you. Really connect with people, and you'll find that you're building this strong sense of community and family, and you're also then building a sense of clarity. This is one of the things more than anything that's built my sense of confidence also, but also a sense of connection. The more you cut yourself away from people when you have debilitated planets, that's not going to work out. The more you connect with other people, if somebody's very low in confidence, just meet people. Not only will that help you build confidence, but you'll realize that people who seem to be very confident aren't actually, because most people are bluffing anyway. Everybody's pretending, let's face it. But also you realize that actually it's not all that bad. It's not all that hard actually. All these people that you admire at doing whatever, when you recognize that actually they're struggling as much as you are, that itself builds confidence. So open your heart to all your feelings and other people's feelings and connect deeply with people, and it will build a sense of clarity and cohesion in your life and that sense of trust and faith in yourself. So that's Jupiter. Next is Venus in Virgo. I mentioned this earlier. Venus in Virgo is the one I find that astrologers tend to sort of pussyfoot around more than any other. Because I understand it, because nobody likes a weak Venus, because we all want to just enjoy life. And really, without Venus, life would be unbearable. So we want Venus for sure. And again, don't forget that even if you have Venus in Virgo debilitated, there are going to be mitigating factors, and I'm going to list them out here again. So Venus in Virgo is this sort of like just being down in the dumps sometimes as well, or just getting very nitpicky and just not enjoying life. Not like in the Pisces side of things where everything was just a flow and I love you the way you are. I'm just going to accept you unconditionally. I'm going to love you no matter who you are. Venus in Virgo, I want to have a partner who has X, Y, Z, and actually no, A, B, C through X, Y, Z. I need to have all of these boxes ticked before I even get with you. That's Venus in Virgo to the extreme. And I've met enough people over the years with Venus in Virgo who are not happy or are in situations that they're not happy with, or meet people, relationships or partners or whatever where there's an issue and they're pointing out that issue and that's all they can look at is the issue. That's Venus in Virgo. And if you don't think that's a problem, then there's a problem. So hope astrologers are listening to this because, you know, again, if you're using the tropical zodiac, Venus in Virgo tropically is not actually in Virgo. It's in Leo. But Venus in Virgo, let's mitigate Venus in Virgo. Okay. First of all, Mercury, which rules Virgo, is going to help out Venus. If Venus is in Virgo, Mercury in Virgo, which it often is with Venus, helps out an awful lot. Where communication is the key. If you're griping about somebody, if you're complaining, criticizing, but you don't communicate that effectively with the other person, first of all, well, they're not going to change anyway. You can't change anybody, but at least, you know, communicate how you feel, right? And opening up communications channels is obviously going to help relationships, help Venus more. So that's Mercury. But also if somebody has Venus in Virgo, there's this sense oftentimes where they feel sort of less than in some way, maybe even more especially an issue for women, but even for men or however you identify, it's the femininity, that's Venus. It's the ability to attract people and situations that you enjoy into your life. And if you don't feel like you have that kind of attraction, or you don't feel attractive, for example, you know, it helps to actually talk about these things, of course. And if you're criticizing yourself all the time, and you'll see this all the time with people who are very self-critical, they're also very critical of other people, but they don't necessarily criticize themselves publicly. They'll criticize everybody else. You'll see this oftentimes when they're just always talking negatively about other people, but actually, you know, that person is going home and feeling bad about themselves. So in other words, Mercury can come in here and help by talking about your feelings, like all of your feelings. Don't just like keep some of them bottled up, even if those feelings are very uncomfortable, like feelings like envy, jealousy, all of these things. Talk about your feelings. Talk it out with somebody who will listen, but don't just complain all the time. That's one of the problems with Venus and Virgo, obviously. Virgo is very kind of factual and very analytical and all of that. And it's good for improving our lives and making things very orderly. But with Venus, Mercury is going to help out more so by just kind of thinking about how can I practically improve this thing, as opposed to let's make a list of all the things that I'm not happy about. No, that's not how Mercury is going to help. Mercury is only going to help if you just communicate how you're feeling and how things can be improved. But you'll realize pretty quickly, I'm sure you have already, that life is not perfect and you're not perfect and nobody's perfect. It's just that someone with Venus and Virgo is likely to be very focused on what is not right, as opposed to someone with Venus and Pisces who will just accept the way it is, and that's it. I can just love you for the way you are. The other planet then is Jupiter. Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces, where Venus is exalted. So Jupiter is also going to help out Venus. And again, it's that sense of connection and nurturing that kind of deep connection with people that is going to be more helpful for a debilitated Venus, as opposed to criticizing people. really deeply connecting with people beyond the sort of superficial sort of list making of you need to have this kind of job and this kind of salary and this kind of lifestyle and you need to have this, this and this. That's not going to help out Venus and Virgo. There's enough of a list going on. Jupiter is going to come in and say, why don't you just simply connect with people like deeply and meaningfully beyond these kind of superficial attributes that you're really criticizing, because you're never going to meet with somebody in that sense truly, deeply. So that's Venus in Virgo. Then lastly, I'm not going to go into the nodes in this podcast because there's a lot of debate about where they're exalted, debilitated, and so on. And even then, there's a whole other complexity around them. I'm going to stick with the planets here. So the very last planet is Saturn. Saturn is debilitated in Aries. And if again you have Saturn in Aries, you know this. You know it very well. And if you don't know it, it's because you're not willing to look at it. And this might be in actual fact the issue. Because Saturn is about doing the things that we know we need to do and not doing the things that we know we shouldn't do. And I know by me just saying that word shouldn't, that is a big trigger for a lot of people with Saturn in Aries. Shouldn't is a real trigger word this day and age, this new age that we live in, because we're told that I shouldn't have to do anything, this shouldn't word. Saturn is the shouldn't word. So you know yourself the things you should be doing and you shouldn't be doing. But people who have Saturn in Aries aren't always clear about where that is. How much of this should I be doing? Or should I be doing it? I don't know. And I want to do this, but I don't know if should I be doing it? And what should I be doing? And then also they don't really know when to stop doing something when they start it. This is the thing with Aries. It's like it's all gung-ho and just action orientated. And Saturn is about stopping, cutting something out. You should not be doing that. That's Saturn in Aries. So they don't always know where the line is, essentially, Saturn in Aries folk. There are 3 planets also for Saturn. So we're finishing with Saturn, who helped out so many planets thus far, right? So many planets like the Sun, Jupiter. Now it's going to be helped out by 3 planets. And the 3 planets are, number 1, the Sun, which is exalted in Aries, where Saturn is debilitated. When you have a strong sense of self and self-esteem and self-confidence, even if you don't have a clear boundary, at least you have a strong sense of self, and nobody's going to be able to overstep that too much. If you don't have a strong sense of self and you don't have a strong boundary, you have a debilitated Sun and a debilitated Saturn, that's a bit of an issue because now you don't have a clear sense of self and you don't know what that is, first of all, as well as not having a clear boundary. You can see that could be a whole mess. So you can still, though, with the Sun or Saturn debilitated, work on these, of course, and they can work off each other. Build your sense of self over time, your sense of confidence and self-esteem, and structure that in some way with Saturn, but also develop that sense of self along with a healthy boundary. A boundary for yourself and for others. But really, it starts with yourself. Because if you don't have a clear boundary for yourself, like I know this is where I need to look at myself, this is what I need to work on in myself, and I don't need you to tell me what I need to work on, by the way, this is what I need to do. And then once I've done that, I'm going to be able to communicate that with you, not through words, because we don't communicate boundaries with words necessarily, we just do by living that. You're not going to mess with somebody who has very clear boundaries, right? And the other planet that will come in here then is Mars, which rules Aries, where Saturn is debilitated. You don't mess with a martial artist. If somebody has built such a strong sense of boundary and strength, like through that sense of self and that kind of martial energy, they don't have to use it, by the way. They don't need to. A martial artist who is so proficient in martial arts doesn't need to move a finger, not to mess with them. So Mars itself is going to help build that strength and courage to be able to set your boundaries for Saturn in Aries. And then finally Venus, which is the ruler of Libra, opposite where Saturn would exalt. Venus is helpful, of course, because relationships give us that sort of clarity about where I end and you begin. And also help us to understand the kind of cooperation that happens between Aries and Libra, between ourself and another. That's what boundaries are. What does a healthy boundary look like? I need to know. I need to actually not just know, I need to experience it in relationship. So Venus is helpful in relationships, being able to understand those clear boundaries, to get into relationships and to understand this kind of negotiation and compromise that has to happen between me and you, between my energy and your energy, my time, your time, all of these Saturn type of things. So that's Saturn in Aries, and they are the mitigating factors. So I hope you get a sense from all of that there is always a sense of lack with a debilitated planet. However, there is always a mitigating factor, nearly always. And even if there isn't in the chart, because I haven't gone through the specifics of how that works out in the chart, you don't even need to have it in your chart. It just means you have to work on those things to help that thing out. You don't always have to directly go to the source of the problem. Because, for example, if you're focusing on Saturn in Aries and you don't have strong boundaries, and all you do is think about remedying Saturn, which you can do, you can remedy Saturn and all of these planets individually, but the problem is you're likely to be so focused on the problem that all you get back is the problem. All you can think about is, I don't have good boundaries. I don't have good boundaries. I'm going to do all of my remedial measures for Saturn, chant for Saturn, do all this work on myself to create these healthy boundaries. It's probably easier to work on the other factors that will help build that while you're also building that. Again, with Mars, with Sun, with Venus for Saturn's weakness. So I hope that's been of help. I hope you got something from that, because this is an important topic in astrology that, again, I think a lot of tropical astrologers in this day and age are pussyfooting around, because, again, first of all, they don't actually use the calculations, and then they're stepping over somebody's issues in order to kind of reach this sort of almost ideal state. Or, again, Venus and Virgo, wonderful. Isn't that wonderful for you? This is how it can express in so many lovely ways, and it can. I'm not saying it cannot. I'm not saying any of these planets cannot express themselves in so many wonderful ways. But when you do that, you're also stepping over their problems and not addressing them. And that person will not feel seen or heard. And if they don't feel seen or heard, they're going to walk away, yes, feeling good about the reading for a little while, but then they'll sink down back into their debilitation. And then they'll start questioning, why didn't that person point out these problems that I have had my whole life? Why didn't they address this and this? And then, oh God, there must be something wrong with me because I can't even behave how my chart suggests. Can you see the problem here? So I hope I've got that across, at least in this podcast. I really feel, as you can tell from my voice, I really feel very passionate about this, having had a lot of challenges in my own life and having to have overcome them myself in my own way. And now with astrology, which has, helped me move forward leaps and bounds. And astrology didn't help me to move forward leaps and bounds by sugarcoating any of it. No, it really addressed the core issues of my weaknesses so that I could actually strengthen myself. And I feel stronger now than I ever have because of it. And I have the strengths of my weaknesses because of it. I haven't ignored any of my weaknesses because I still have them. I still have all of my weaknesses, just like I was when I was a kid. The difference is I know them so well that I've moved beyond them as well, and I take them with me in a different way. And that is so crucial for you to hear if you have a weakness in yourself, a weak planet like a debilitated planet or an afflicted planet or whatever it might be. Don't ignore them. Work with them. Have the strengths of your weaknesses. So, if you have any questions, feel free to post below. I would love to hear your thoughts on this one. If you have any debilitated planets yourself, I want to hear about it. Please ask me questions. If you want to share your experience, I would love to hear your experience of this. And yeah, I might do more on this because there's so much more to be said about all of this. I could talk about, how it works out in the chart and so many other things that, is incorporated into this work. But anyway, I hope you got something from that. Thank you so much for listening to this all the way through to the end. Again, don't forget to type your questions or your comments below. Share some of your own experience. I'd love to hear from you. Okay, until next time.